Hi everyone, in this tutorial we're going to look at how to set up a process or flow in Microsoft Power Automate that will send a user a personalised certificate via email once they have passed the quiz created in Microsoft Forms. To complete this process you need a number of things. The first and most important is a Power Automate Premium license. This is because two of the actions in the flow are only available with a premium license. At the time of recording this video, there is the option of starting a 90-day trial for premium features, but the license cost is fairly reasonable anyway. It seems appropriate here to give a shout out to my line manager and digital services at Staffordshire University for purchasing and enabling a premium license for my work account, so that I can actually do this. There are other things you need for this process, so you need a certificate in the form of a Word document, you need a quiz set up in Microsoft Forms, and you need an Excel spreadsheet with a table that matches the fields in Microsoft Forms. All of these will need to be set up or accessible to you within your Microsoft account, the same account that you'll be using to create the flow in Power Automate, whether that's saved in your OneDrive or in SharePoint for those documents anyway. Of course you'll need the forms saved in Forms. And as part of this tutorial I'll be building all of these things from scratch anyway. But if you want a head start, I'll be providing templates for you to use in the description of the video. So let's get started. So we're going to start with creating the quiz in Microsoft Forms. When you've logged in, you'll see this screen with a new quiz button at the top. Select the new quiz button, which will open up a new quiz for you. So I'm going to call this Maths Tutorial Quiz. You can add a description as well if you like, and then we can start adding in the elements of the quiz. So this will be the questions and all the fields we need to collect the data from the user completing the quiz. So what we're going to do to start off with is create a new section. So I'm going to go to the Add New button just here. I'm going to select the little arrowhead to open additional options. And then I'm going to go down to Section and just select that. This section will be for the user's information, as we need their email address to send them the certificate and their name to go on the certificate as well. I'm adding these questions to a section that's separate from the quiz questions to make things clearer for the user, but the design of this is completely up to you, as long as you enter these questions in your form or in your quiz. So give your section, this section, a title. In this instance I'll call the section Your Details. Next we're going to add a new question, so we're going to add a text question. I'm going to click on Add New and just select Text. And with this question we're going to request their name for the certificate. We also want to emphasise that they check this for accuracy, so I'm going to add a subtitle in as well by clicking the three dots in the bottom right of the question editor, just here, and then selecting Subtitle. Once I've added the subtitle, it's just worth checking some of these additional settings. So there's no correct answer to this question, so I'm not going to do anything there. There are no points allocated to this question, so I'm not going to add anything in this little points field either. But we do want to make this a required question, because we don't want them to leave this field blank without them continuing the quiz. Just so you know, all of the questions in this quiz will be required, so make sure you turn this button on everywhere. When you're finished, click away from the question and that will save it. So we can now see that it's displaying in the form without the editor, and that means it's saved. We want two additional questions in this section. The next question is another text question, and it's a request for their email address, which we'll send their certificate to. So we'll again need to emphasise that the user double checks this is entered correctly by adding something in the subtitle to prompt this. So it's really important that the user enters their email address here correctly and that you emphasise that. Unfortunately there's no validation option here in Forms, so they need to make sure that this is accurate, otherwise it will make this whole process fail. Again, we'll leave the correct answer and the points fields blank and just make sure this is required. The final question in the section is for data protection purposes. We need to add in a consent question, as the user's email address will be added to an Excel spreadsheet as part of the process. We can emphasise that the data is being collected solely for the purpose of sending the certificate, and it's good practice to remove all the data from the form and the spreadsheet regularly. You could probably even build this into a flow to regularly remove the data for you, although we won't be covering that part of this today. So for this we just need to create a choice question So I'm going to go to add new and then choice. And then add the consent information into the question field. We then need to ensure that only one option is available. So we'll just delete option 2 just here. And this option should be yes. And we also have to make sure that it's a required question so that if they don't consent, they can't proceed with the quiz and therefore we can't collect their data. So this section is now complete and we just need to add another one in. Select add new, then the arrowhead, and then section. This section will contain the quiz questions, so I'll just call this quiz. You probably have your questions for this quiz ready and it's likely you know how to use forms, so I'll just go through the setup of one question, and this process works best with multiple choice questions. So I'm going to be using choice questions only, but in theory you could also use text questions as long as you knew that there was only one correct response. So I'm going to select add new, and I'm now going to select choice. I'll add my question into the question field, and then I can add my answer options in the options fields. If you need to add additional options, select the add option button. You need to specify which answer is correct. To do this, hover over the right answer and icons appear to the right. Select the tick icon to identify this as the correct option. There are two other options to complete here. First, specify how many points this question is worth. I'm going with 20 as my quiz is worth 100 points in total and I have 5 questions. Finally, we just want to make this a required question so that the quiz can't be submitted without this question being answered. All the things we've just gone through are important. There's just one optional thing that you might want to consider, and that is clicking on the 3 dots in the bottom right of the question editor and selecting shuffle options. And what will happen here is every time a user comes to complete this quiz, the options for this question will appear in a different order. I'm going to go ahead and finish my quiz off now and then move on to the next part. So I've now completed my quiz, ready to send to my students or clients, and next I need to create the certificate that they'll receive should they pass this test. This certificate will need to be a Word document. Design your certificate in your preferred software and ensure that the design is available as an image file. All I've done to get my image file is I've altered a template available here in Word. To get this template set up, I then exported the Word document to PDF and converted that PDF to an image file in Adobe Acrobat. But of course you can use other tools, you can use Photoshop, Canva, anything like that to create your certificate design. So I've got my new Word document open just here, and I'm just going to change the layout of it and the orientation of it to landscape, just so that it looks more like a certificate. And then in this document that I'll be using as the certificate, I'm just going to insert my image file into it. So there we go. So this is the image file that I've set up. I'm just going to play around with some of the rulers. So once the image is inserted into your document, it's around the sort of size that you want it to be, go to the Wrap Text tool, and you can do it in Word just by clicking on the Layout Options button here in the top right, just at the top right of the image. And I'm just going to use this Behind Text option in the Wrap Text tool so that I can move it around a bit easier, and so that it definitely stays behind the text that I add to the document. So now I've got this to look the way I want it to, I need to add in fields for the user's name and a field for the date and timestamp. Of course, you can add in other fields as well if you want to. And to do this, what we want to do is we want to move the cursor, and of course we'll move the image file back if the cursor moves the image file. You just want to move the cursor to where you want it to appear on the certificate. So I've just pressed enter a few times to move the cursor down. Of course, just going to rearrange this image file again a little bit more. There we go, that's about right. So just make sure my cursor's there. I'm going to change the alignment, the paragraph alignment here, so it's center aligned. You can see there that the cursor now is around the place where the name of the user who's going to complete the quiz is going to end up on the certificate. So now the cursor's there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the developer tab just here. If you don't have the developer tab in your ribbon, then what we need to do is we need to right click on a blank space in the ribbon and go to customize the ribbon just there. And in these word options on the right hand side, you've got a list of tools. Just make sure that this developer option just here is checked. And when it's checked, click OK. Then you should have the developer tab up here. So now that the developer tab is available, select it, and then in the controls section just here, select the second button along. This is the plain text content control. And this is the only control that will work with the Power Automate flow. So make sure this is the only text tool that you're using. So I'm going to click on that to add the content control to my certificate. And you can see here it's entered this field just here. And at the moment it says click or tap here to enter text. When this is added, make sure it's definitely where you want it positioned. And then you can change the font within it. So I'm just going to go to home and I'm going to increase the size of the text. I might even change the font type as well to something like Tahoma. And I might even make it bold as well. So the last thing to do with the field is to go back to your ribbon, go to the developer tab, make sure that that field is selected and click on the properties button in the controls. In these properties, enter a title and a tag. In this case, you'll probably just put name into each. And this is how Power Automate identifies this field in the document. Click on OK. Your name field is now set up. So repeat this process if you'd like to add any additional fields, and I'll do that for the date and timestamp. So I'm just going to move my cursor. Again, I'm going to click on properties and I'm going to just put date in here. Click on OK. So when your fields are set up, make sure your certificate is saved, and that is saved to your OneDrive or OneDrive for Business account or to a SharePoint document library. So I'm going to just save mine to OneDrive. Once it's saved into your OneDrive or SharePoint, it's ready to go. So there's one last thing to create before we get stuck into Power Automate. This is the Excel spreadsheet that will be used by Power Automate to trigger a pass-fail process. So open Excel and add the following fields into the first row, which will correspond to your quiz in Microsoft Forms. So we want name, email, question 1, question 2, and so on, depending on the number of questions in your quiz. So I'll just have 5 up here. Of course, if you have 10 or more than that, just make sure that you add a column for each question. And then we need 2 additional columns. So we need score and we need one that's unique ID. The next thing to do is to click and drag on the spreadsheet to select the cells that you've just added and the row underneath. And what we're going to do is we're going to make this into a table. So in the ribbon, in the Home tab, we want to go to Format as Table, and we just want to select one of the table styles from here. So I'll go for this blue one just here. A Create Table pop-up will appear. Because you've selected cells in the spreadsheet already, the first option, where is the data for your table, will already be populated. We just want to check this box here for my table has headers, and then we want to click OK. So what we have here then now is we have a table set up within our spreadsheet. So there's one last thing to set up here, and this is to enable the spreadsheet to calculate the score for the quiz, so then it triggers the pass-fail process in Power Automate. So we need to just go to, in the second row, in the score column, what we need to do is we need to type in a formula. So I'm going to go up to the formula bar just here, and I'm going to start off with equals sum, and that's because we'll be calculating a total of different cells. And next we'll be adding conditions for each of the answer fields. So we'll need to repeat this within the formula for each of the questions that you've set up, this next part. So type in an opening bracket, and then if, then another opening bracket, and enter the cell in the row directly under the header for question 1. So in this case it will be C2. So if C2 is our answer, we want to type in the equal symbol, and then we want to type in the correct answer for the question 1 that we set up in Microsoft Forms. In this case, the correct answer is Algeria. So I'm just going to add Algeria in here in quotation marks. So we've got C2 equals Algeria in quotation marks. And that's the first part of a logical test formula, which you can see appearing just underneath the formula field there. So the first part of this is the correct response, which is basically the identifying criteria for Excel. And the next part is the value or points if true. So the points we want to allocate to this response if it's correct. So in this instance, it'll be 20 points for a correct answer. And then I'll add a comma in. And if it's not Algeria, we want to allocate 0 points. So I'm just going to enter 0 points in here. So I've entered the correct response to the first question, followed by the points allocation of 20 if they get it right, and then a big 0 if they get it wrong. So after this, we just need to close brackets, and then we need to repeat this process for each of the question responses, separated by plus symbols. So I'm just going to add a plus in here, because what we want is the sum of each of the question responses. So I'm going to repeat this for the next answer, so you can just see this again. So open bracket if, another open bracket, we want D2 in this case. So for question 2 equals, and then we just need the response to question 2. So here it would be Elijah Wood. And then 20 points if it's correct, and 0 points if it's incorrect. And then 2 close brackets. So again, I'm going to go for a plus, and I'm just going to complete this now for the other responses. Brilliant. So now my formula is set up. I can just press enter to lock that into the H2 field for the score for this table. And all I need to do now is make sure that this is saved in my OneDrive or OneDrive for Business accounts or a SharePoint document library. So I'm just going to save this to OneDrive. So brilliant, now this is saved to my OneDrive. Then that's the last piece of the puzzle before I can head over to Power Automate and put all of these things that I've just created to work. Open your browser or a new tab and then type in flow.microsoft.com. When you're signed in, select the My Flows option in the menu on the left hand side. Now, if you've downloaded the template I provided, you can just import this and work on it. But I'll be demonstrating how to start this from scratch. So at the top of this page, click the New Flow button and select Automated Cloud Flow. So here, type in the flow name. So we'll call this Power Automate Certificate Tutorial. And then select a trigger, for which we'll use when a new response is submitted in Microsoft Forms. If it doesn't appear in the list here, then you can search for the trigger in this field above the list. Select your trigger and then click Create. You've now started your flow and you'll see the trigger that you've just added on its own at the top of this page. So in this trigger, we need to pick a form to use as the trigger. So here we'll be using the quiz that we set up earlier. So click on the Pick a Form field and select the quiz that you created from the list. So mine was called Match Tutorial Quiz. So I've selected that and now it's populated that field. So now that's done, we need to create a new step. So select the New Step button just here. And then we need to find the next step. So let's use this search field to find the Get Response Details action. You can see it's just here. Once you've found it, select it in the list. And you'll now see it's been added to the flow. So now we need to populate the fields in this action by clicking on them. In Form ID, if you click on that field, we need to find the quiz we created again. So it will be Matt's Tutorial Quiz. And in the Response ID field, we'll be adding dynamic content. So dynamic content appears once you've selected the field, and it shows you all the options you can choose from related to the steps in your flow. So here we just see the one option, and that's the response ID for the quiz. So we're going to select this, and it will populate this response ID field. So next we're going to save the flow, and I'm just going to do that by clicking on save in the top right here. It's a good idea to save your flow regularly so you don't lose anything. I won't mention this again after this point, but it's just a good idea to keep on top of it. So now we need to add the next step. So I'm going to click on next new step again. And this is the add a row into a table action for Excel. So I'm just going to search for that. Add a row. Just here. At this point, I want to say thanks to Stephen Taylor for his tutorials, which helped me to figure out this part of the process. Check out Stephen's channel for some great EdTech tutorials. So I'm going to click on this add a row into a table action just here. And once I've added it, we need to locate the file that we want to populate, which is the Excel spreadsheet that we created earlier. So what we want to do is we want to click on the location field. And here I'll be selecting OneDrive for Business because that's where I've saved the Excel spreadsheet. I'm then going to select the document library, which here is OneDrive. For me, my OneDrive always appears as the first one in the list. If you get more than one OneDrive, click on it until the next fields show what you want them to. So just make sure OneDrive is selected in there. Next, what we want to do is locate the file that we've just set up in this file field. So I'm going to click on this little folder icon just here, and it's going to bring up a list of all my folders in my OneDrive. So I'm going to go to the folder in which I saved the Excel spreadsheet, and I'm just going to select it here. It's called Power Automate Tutorial. So now I've added that in, the file has been located. The last thing I need to do now is to select the table that I set up in the table field. So I'm going to click on that field, and the only table that I set up will be this one, table 1. So I'm going to select that and populate that field. Now what you've noticed from what I've just done there is that the column headings for that table now appear within this step. So I need to go through each of these fields now and populate them. So I'm going to click on each field, and I'm going to add the corresponding dynamic content from the form for each field. So here in name, I'm going to add, please enter the name you would like displayed on your certificate. In the email field, I'll select, please enter your email address, and then I'll go through the rest of these questions. What's important here is that we leave the score field blank, but we do want to complete the unique ID field, so I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to add the response ID dynamic content just here. So this step is now set up to populate your Excel spreadsheet based on the responses to your quiz. Let's add a new step. So this next step that I add is optional, but I've added it to ensure that the flow has time to process and populate the Excel document, as following this we're going to have to draw the data back out of that Excel document, specifically the score that the Excel document should have calculated once the fields were populated. So if you want to add this, search for the delay action, and I'm just going to click on delay schedule just here, and then I'm going to add in some buffer time. So I'm going to set the count here just to 10, and I'm going to set the unit to seconds by, again, just by clicking on this field, that drop down menu appears. 10 seconds is likely to be more than enough time for the process to complete and for the spreadsheet to populate. Now after the delay, I can add the new step. So I'm going to click on new step, and this step that I'm going to add is a get a row action for Excel. So I'm going to type in get a row, and we just want this here, so get a row, and this is how we're going to access the row and draw in the score information from the form submission. This is important because this will act as the trigger or the condition for the next part of the flow. So here we'll need to find that Excel document again. So select the location, select the document library, locate the file, select the table, Now we want to specify which row we want to get from this Excel spreadsheet. So what we're going to do is we're going to refer to the unique ID of the submitted quiz, which we populated into the Excel document. This is so that the row and the information returned to the flow are unique every time. So in the key column field, select unique ID. You can see here this is a list of all the columns in the spreadsheet in the table. So I'm going to click unique ID, and in the key value field I'm going to select dynamic content, and I'm going to select the response ID dynamic content from Microsoft Forms. So the next part is where it gets interesting. Now we need to tell Power Automate to do one thing if the score is above the pass mark, in this case 80%, and another thing if the score is below the pass mark. For this we need to add a new step, and this step is condition control. So I'm going to click new step, and you see here condition control is actually right at the top. This gives you branching options based on if a condition is met. If yes, it will do one thing, if no, it will do another. So we need to set this condition. So in order to work this bit out, I got some help from the YouTube channel of Anders Jensen. It's definitely worth checking out Anders' videos on Power Automate. Because Power Automate recognises anything added to this field as text data rather than as an integer, and excuse any misunderstanding here, but what we have to do is for the flow to recognise it as a numeric value is to add in an expression, which we can do by clicking on the field, choose a value, and then where the dynamic content options appear, we now select the expression tool just here. So from what I understand, it's the float expression that works the magic here, and the full expression is float, and then it's outputs, so opening bracket, and then outputs, and then it's another opening bracket, and then with an apostrophe we're going to type in get underscore a underscore row, then we've got a close bracket just here, then I'm going to add in a question mark, and then I'm going to add in a square bracket, square opening bracket, an apostrophe, body, slash score. So from what I understand, the get a row part refers to the get a row action in the flow, and the body slash score is the field from the Excel spreadsheet that it's referring to. So it's bringing in that cell from the spreadsheet, bringing in that text value, that text data, and converting it to a numeric value instead. That Power Automate can recognise. So now I'm going to click on OK, and it's added that expression to my condition. So the next thing to do is to specify in this drop down menu that the condition is set to be greater than or equal to the number that I put in this last field, and in this last field I want it to be 80 because that is the pass mark. And of course, if your pass mark is lower or higher, put that mark in there instead. So this condition is now set up, and we can add steps to each outcome based on the user's score. So we'll start with what happens if the user fails. You can do a number of things here, but for me it's important to acknowledge the attempt and provide feedback. So I'll add in an action to send an email to the user if they don't meet the pass mark. So I'm going to go to add an action just here, and I'm going to type in send an email. You can see it appears here at the top of my list of actions. We can now start populating these fields. In the to field, you can add dynamic content to it. So just by clicking on add dynamic content to the bottom right of the field. The dynamic content we need to add is from the Microsoft form, and it's the response to the question asking the user for their email address. So I'm just going to select that here, please enter your email address, and that will send this email to that individual. Next, we want to specify the subject. So type in here what you want the subject of the email to be. In this case, I'll put test outcome. And then you can type out the body of the email in this body field just here. And you can add dynamic content into the body depending on what you want the email to say. So for instance, here I can put dear, and then I can put name from the Excel spreadsheet if I want to, and then I can type out the rest of the email. As well as adding dynamic content for things such as their name, the score. You could even put all their responses in here if you wanted to. You can also use the formatting tools to emphasize certain parts of the email, just like this. And you can also add hyperlinks. So for this email specifically, I'm going to add a hyperlink to the please click here text. It will take them back to the form if they want another attempt. When you're finished with this step, this part of the condition is now complete. So if they don't pass, they will receive this email with your feedback. Now let's turn our attention to the yes condition. If they pass, we want them to receive a certificate. So we'll focus on this process now. So add an action to the yes condition. And this first step we want is the get file content action. So I'm just going to type that in there. And because we're working with a file in OneDrive, we're going to use OneDrive for Business, but of course you can also use SharePoint if you've saved your files to SharePoint instead. So I'm going to click Get File Content, and then I'm going to search for the file that I set up earlier. This will be the certificate, so I'm going to go to the certificate template that I set up. I've clicked on the field and I'm just navigating to where that certificate template is. You'll then see that the file path is populated into this field. So next we want to add another step. This time we want to add a populate a Microsoft Word template step. So I'm just going to type that in. This is the first of the premium features that we'll be using in Power Automate, the ones that we need a license for. And we'll be using this step to add the user's name and the date and time to the certificate. Select that to add it. Use the top 3 fields to locate the file within OneDrive. So I'm going to click on Location, specify OneDrive for Business, Document Library OneDrive, File by clicking on the folder. Now, once you've completed these fields, if a document has been set up correctly, you'll see the content control fields that you set up within the certificate in the action now. So this will be the name and the date and other things as well that you might have added in here as content controls. So I'm going to click on the date field first, and I'm just going to add dynamic content in here. So I'm going to add from Microsoft Forms just here underneath the heading Get Response Details, the submission time. And that will add in the date and timestamp for this submission. Then I'm going to click the name field, and I'm going to pull in the name from the Microsoft form as well. So please enter the name you would like displayed. So this step is now complete. When a user passes the quiz, the template will be populated with their name and the date that they completed the test. Now we need to add a new step. Once the template is populated, we actually need to create it. So I'm going to add an action, and I'm going to type in create file. And again, because we're using OneDrive for Business, I'm going to use this one, but you can also use SharePoint. So I'm going to click on Create File OneDrive for Business. And what we want to do here is use these fields to specify where we want this certificate to be saved. So I'm going to click on the folder of the top field. I'm going to navigate to where the certificate is. And this time, instead of going into the folder, I'm actually going to select the folder here. So make sure you actually click on the name of the folder where you want this certificate to be saved. So I'm going to click on Power Automate Tutorial, and you'll see that the field is now complete. In the file name field, the naming convention is your choice. You can use dynamic content to help you give the file a unique name if you want. So I'm going to click on the field, and using dynamic content, I'm going to add in a field for the name of the individual. You could also, for instance, use the unique ID from Forms if you want here instead. And then what I tend to do is I add in a space just after the dynamic content in the field, in the file name field. And then I'm just going to type in certificate. And then I'm just going to add the file extension .docx just to be on the safe side. In the final field where it says file content, we need to add the dynamic content Microsoft Word document just here. This is the template we've just populated. And what we want to do is we want to create a new file with this content. So I'm going to click on that, and that field is now populated. At this stage of the process, the user's unique certificate will have been generated as a Word document and saved as a file within your OneDrive. So what we want to do next is convert it to a PDF just so it looks a bit nicer, a bit more official. So next we're going to add another step by clicking Add an Action. And this step is the second of the premium features that we need to use, and it's convert Word document to PDF. So if it doesn't come up if you type in the actual name of the action into the search field, then the best thing to do to find this particular action and the one before, where it was populate a Microsoft Word template, click on the premium button just here, and then you might have to click on Word Online, and you'll be able to find those premium actions in here. So the reason that we need to create the Word document before this step is that this new part of the process, the conversion part of the process, identifies the Word document that we created as the one to convert. So select the location and document library. So I'm going to click on the location field and select OneDrive for Business, and then click on document library and select OneDrive. And in the file field this time, we're not going to click the folder to navigate to a document, because the file that we've created before this flow's run doesn't actually exist. So what we want this flow to do is select a file that hasn't yet been created but will have been by this stage in the process. So click on the field itself to bring up dynamic content. And in the options under the Create File heading, look for the path dynamic content just here and select it. So what that will do is at this stage of the process, it will pull in the Word template that you've just created as a Word document and then convert it to PDF. So this part is now complete, and the next part of the flow that I'm going to add is optional. So I use this part so that a copy of the PDF is saved to OneDrive as well, just in case there's an error with the user's email address. That way it can be sent manually if needed. So add a new action, and this will be a create file step. I'm going to select create file OneDrive for Business. I'm going to select the path of the folder, and because we're selecting the path of the folder, again, we're not going into the folder, I'm going to select the text of the folder this time and populate that field with that path. In the file name field, add dynamic content to identify the file. So again, I'm just going to enter the name of the user who submitted the quiz and type in space and then certificate. And I'll add the file extension of .pdf. And now in the file content field, I'm going to click on the field and I'm going to add the PDF document dynamic content. So there we go. This step is now complete. Purely optional, but just in case you want a copy as well, it's worth saving a PDF version to your OneDrive. So now we come to the final step of this flow, which is sending the certificate to the user. So here we need to create another send an email action. So I'm going to click on add an action. I'm going to type in send an email. I'm going to click this one here, Office 365 Outlook. So I'm going to use the same approach as the other email. So I'm going to click on the to field and add dynamic content, and do that by clicking the add dynamic content button to the bottom right of the to field. And I'm going to populate that with the please enter your email address response from the Microsoft form. Next, I'm going to specify the subject of the email, and then in the body of the email, add in the contents for the email. Make sure if you add dynamic content for the score within the body of this email, that you select the right one. You need to select the score from the Get a Row field. So once you've added your email, what we need to do now is attach the PDF certificate to this email. So at this point, I'm going to click the Show Advanced Options item at the bottom of this step. There are several additional fields here, but the main ones to focus on are the ones for the attachment. This is where we attach the certificate. So in the attachment's name field, you can either type something in here, it could just be generic such as certificate.pdf, or you can add dynamic content. So I'm going to click on the field, and underneath the Create File To heading, I'm going to add the name content, because that will give the document that's attached the exact same name as the PDF that's been saved to your OneDrive. So in the attachment's contents field next, we want to click on this to add dynamic content as well, and we're going to scroll down to where it says PDF document, just here, and click on that. And this adds the PDF content to the attachment. So that's it. Once you've finished that step, your flow is complete and it's ready to go. So let's save your flow one last time. Click on the save button in the top right hand side and we'll test this one out. Complete this form now just to test it. I'm going to select my answers and I know which ones are correct, so I'm going to make sure I get 100%. And now I'm going to click submit. The moment of truth. If you go back into Power Automate and go back into my flows, click on the name of the flow you've just created. If your flow works, you'll see the outcome here in the run history as successful. You can see mine is currently running. I'm just going to refresh it. And there we go, I can see that it succeeded. So I'm just going to go into each of the different elements of the process and just show you what they should all look like. So I'm going to go first into the Excel spreadsheet. And you can see here that my table has been populated with my name, my email, my responses. It's calculated the score for me and it's given me a unique ID for this form. So this part of the process looks like this. If I go into my OneDrive folder, I can see that my Word document and my PDF have both been created by the process as well. This is my personalised certificate. And if I go into my inbox, I can see that I've received an email with my certificate attached. And if I click on that, I can see the body of my email with my dynamic contents, my name and my score in there. And I can also, if I want to, just preview this certificate to see that it's definitely personalised for me at the date and time of my submission. So there we go. This is to confirm that I have completed this Power Automate flow. The flow is complete and working. I hope that you found this helpful and that you get to send lots of certificates to those taking your quizzes. Let me know in the comments if this worked for you, and thanks very much for watching.